My name is Layla. I was 17 when my father died and my entire world was divided neatly, coldly, and without my name on a single page. There was no reading of the will like in the movies. No family sitting around a table, weeping and reminiscing. Just a lawyer in a gray suit, a stack of papers, and a line I'll never forget. Everything goes to your brother. Everything. The house, the land, the business, the bank accounts, even my father's old prayer beads. My name wasn't written anywhere, not even in the margins, and no one in the room looked surprised, except me. My mother didn't meet my eyes. My brother, Zaid, sat back in his chair like he'd just won a game he hadn't even played. And I didn't cry. I just blinked hard and asked the only question that mattered. Was this Baba's decision? The lawyer shifted awkwardly. He looked at my mother. She cleared her throat. Your father thought Zaid would take care of you. I stared at her. You mean, you told him I didn't need anything? She didn't respond. She didn't have to. That night, I packed my things, not in rage, not even in sadness, in clarity. Because I realized something most girls never get the chance to learn this early. Some families don't betray you all at once. They do it slowly with silence, with smiles, with phrases like trust your brother, and if you let them, they'll write your whole life story for you. In invisible ink, I left home with one suitcase, a second-hand phone, and exactly 80 lira in my wallet. Zaid didn't stop me. He just said, you'll be back. When life hits you hard. I smiled, not because he was wrong, but because one day, I knew I'd say the same words to him. And when I did, I'd mean something entirely different. For the next 2 years, I worked harder than I ever thought possible. Morning shifts at a bakery, evenings tutoring middle school kids in math, weekends cleaning guest houses. I didn't complain, because every coin was a brick, every step a foundation, every sleepless night, silent promise. They didn't want me to inherit? Fine. I'd build something that couldn't be handed to me or taken away. I didn't chase revenge. I chased value, self-worth, resilience, and slowly, life began to respond. I met people who saw me really saw me. A woman named Huda who owned a second-hand bookstore let me sleep in her back office for free. An old man named Ethan, who taught me the basics of digital design after I helped him set up an email account. Piece by piece, skill by skill, I rebuilt myself. And the more I grew, the more I noticed something strange. My family? They never once called to check on me. No, are you safe? No, do you need anything? It was like I'd never existed. Until one day, I saw a headline. Zaid al-Hashimi's company facing bankruptcy investigation. I blinked at the screen. It had been 3 years. Last I heard, he'd expanded Baba's modest construction business into a flashy real estate firm, imported cars, designer watches, social media posts about building an empire, and now, he was collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance. I didn't smile, not out of pity, but because I finally understood, my inheritance wasn't stolen, it was wasted. 2 days later, I got a message from my mother, the first in over 1,100 days. Please come home. Zaid needs help. We all do. I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally had the power to decide if I would say anything at all. That night, I walked into my own one-bedroom apartment, paid for in full, decorated with thrifted art and potted plants. I sat at my desk, opened a fresh page in my journal, and wrote. They erased me from the will, but I wrote myself back into the story. And that was the moment the real revenge began. Not through lawsuits, not through shouting matches, but through a life so whole, it made their betrayal look small. Have you ever been cut out of something you helped build simply because they didn't believe in you? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the best revenge is not taking what they gave you but showing them what you built without them. They said they needed me. The same people who forgot I existed for 3 years suddenly remembered I was alive when everything they built came crashing down. Zaid had burned through nearly every lira Baba left him. The company was under investigation. Employees hadn't been paid. Contracts were defaulting. My mother's voice trembled on the phone like she had just realized what kind of son she had raised. And me? I was no longer the quiet girl they erased from the will. I was the woman with a choice. It started with a knock at my door. I didn't give them my address. I never shared where I lived. But I suppose when you're desperate enough, you find a way. When I opened the door, it wasn't Zaid who stood there. It was my mother. Her eyes looked older, not from age, but from worry. She wore a long black coat and a face I no longer recognized, part pride, part shame, all desperation. "Can I come in?" she asked. I didn't say yes. I just stepped aside. She looked around my apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The kind of space that tells a story. Every plant on the windowsill, every book stacked by the bed, every framed duo on the wall, all placed by hands that had to build from nothing. "You live alone?" she asked softly. I nodded. She sat, uninvited, on my couch. And then, after a long pause, she said it. "We made a mistake. Not, we wronged you. Not, we're sorry. Just a mistake, like misplacing a receipt or overcooking rice." I said nothing. She continued. "Zaid, he's drowning. He invested too fast, trusted the wrong people. The house is mortgaged. They might take it. The company too." I nodded slowly. "I read." "You did?" "It was on the news," I said, crossing my arms. "Apparently bankruptcy is more visible than betrayal." She looked away. Then she did what I never thought she'd do. She cried. Softly, quietly, like she didn't want even Allah to hear her. "I know what we did," she said, "and I'll never defend it. But I'm asking you now, not for him, for me, for your father's name. Please, Layla, help us. Help your brother." There it was, the plea, the rope they hoped I'd throw down to pull them out of the pit they dug. I could have said no, I had every right. But part of me, a part I wish I could hate, still loved my father. Not the man who signed the will, but the man who used to braid my hair before Fajr. The man who taught me to read Quran slowly, with meaning. And I knew that even if his final act betrayed me, his memory still guided me. I sighed. "What do you want me to do?" She explained everything. The debts, the frozen accounts, the bad contracts, the desperate clients threatening lawsuits. They needed someone to help salvage what was left of the family business. Someone who knew how to manage quietly, discreetly, without scandal. Someone who wouldn't ask for control, just clarity. They wanted me, the one they once erased. Now they wanted me to rewrite the story. I gave her 3 conditions. 1. Zaid does not speak to me ever. 2. I make the financial decisions, or I walk. 3. My name goes on everything. She nodded quickly, almost too quickly. That's when I realized they didn't want justice. They wanted rescue. But I didn't care, because this wasn't about saving them. It was about reclaiming what should have been mine from the start. The next week, I walked into the company headquarters. It used to be a small warehouse. Now it was a mess of mirrored glass, unpaid rent notices, and furniture too expensive for a business that had no profit. Zaid wasn't there. Good. The staff looked shocked when they saw me. Some recognized me from the old days. Others whispered, "Is that the sister?" Yes, the forgotten one, the silent one, the one they would remember now. I spent the first 2 days doing nothing but reading. Every contract, every invoice, every message Zaid had sent to investors, filled with fake projections and empty promises. He had tried to be a king without a kingdom, and now there were fires everywhere. I didn't panic. I took notes. And then I got to work. I negotiated settlements, cut dead weight deals, sold off the luxury cars he'd leased to look successful. And with the last of the company's liquid funds, I paid the employees, all of them. Because unlike Zaid, I knew the power of loyalty, and they saw it too. One by one, they stopped whispering behind my back and started saying Miss Layla with respect. Not because I demanded it, because I earned it. 3 weeks later, Zaid showed up, in my office, unannounced. He looked thinner, tired, desperate. He didn't sit. He just said, "You think this makes you better than me?" I stared at him for a long moment, then stood slowly and said, "No, you made you less than me. I'm just surviving what you destroyed." He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because we both knew he wasn't there to apologize. He was there to watch what power looked like when it wasn't squandered. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment. The stars were soft, the air smelled like jasmine, and my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old employee, one of Baba's first hires. "Your father would have been proud, not of your success, but of your mercy." I looked up at the sky, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because they needed me, but because I no longer needed them. Have you ever been asked to fix what someone else broke without them ever saying sorry? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes, the best revenge is letting them watch you repair what they shattered, and doing it better than they ever could. Success is quiet at first. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or confetti. It creeps in disguised as small wins, cleaner spreadsheets, a room that doesn't reek of stress anymore. And after everything I'd rebuilt, that's exactly how it felt. 3 months after I took over the company, things were steady, not flashy, not headline worthy, but steady. Salaries were paid, deadlines were met. Clients started returning calls without hesitation in their voice. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought maybe they'd let me keep this peace. But I forgot who I was dealing with. It started with a press release. One of our longtime clients had landed a government development deal, their biggest yet, and they mentioned our company by name as part of their success team. I didn't know they were going to do that. With support from the Al-Hashimi Group's strategic leadership, the project moved from planning to execution in record time. It should have been a proud moment. Until I saw who gave the quote. Zaid. He hadn't been in a meeting for weeks. He hadn't written a single email, answered a single call, or sat through a single client negotiation. But there he was, quoted in full. At Al-Hashimi, we're committed to rebuilding trust, honoring legacy, and adapting to the modern marketplace. The only thing he had committed to recently was staying out of my way. And now he was plastering his name over my work like a child stealing credit for a drawing they didn't sketch. I didn't call him. I didn't scream. I went straight to the board. There were 5 of them, all older men, all loyal to my father's name. Until now, I laid everything out on the table. The recovery plan I drafted, the contracts I renegotiated, the staff I restructured, the debt I managed, and the absence of Zaid through it all. Then I showed them the quote and asked one question. Is this how we define leadership now? Silence in crisis, and spotlight in victory? They looked uncomfortable, but not surprised, because this wasn't new. Zaid had always been loudest when there was applause. One of the board members, an old friend of Baba's, leaned forward and said, "What do you want us to do?" I met his eyes. Make it right. He hesitated. Meaning, the next statement that goes public has my name on it. And if that doesn't happen, you'll be giving a statement explaining why the woman who saved your company resigned without warning. They didn't argue, because they couldn't afford to. That weekend, an internal memo went out, then a correction from the client's PR team, then a statement, brief but clear, from the Al-Hashimi board. We acknowledge the efforts of Layla Al-Hashimi, who has led the company's strategic and operational turnaround over the past several months. My name, on the record. Finally, Zaid didn't speak to me for 2 weeks, but when he did, he didn't yell, he didn't deny. He just stared at me in the hallway of the office, eyes cold, and said, "You really think you're the face of this family now?" I smiled, not because it was funny, because it was true. The next morning, I came in to find my nameplate, the one on my office door, missing. In its place was a cheap sticker that just said operations, a small act of pettiness. Childish, transparent, but effective because it reminded me of exactly who I was dealing with. And it reminded me what my real goal was, not revenge, independence. So I called a meeting with the legal team, not about Zaid, about me. Specifically, about the shares Baba left him and whether any of them could be negotiated, purchased, or leveraged based on mismanagement. They were surprised, but not opposed, because even though Zaid's name was still everywhere, mine was the one that kept the lights on. In private, I started building something new, a separate division. My division, new clients, new contracts, new branding, no family name attached. And when it was ready, I made a quiet announcement. Al-Hashimi Development Group will now operate alongside Layla Strategies, a fully independent consultancy. No drama, no slamming doors, just a clean split of identity. And when Zaid found out, he barged into my office, slammed the press release on my desk, and asked, "So this is it? You're cutting me out?" I looked up calmly. "No, I'm cutting myself free. There's a difference." That night, I walked through the office after hours. The lights were dim, the halls were quiet, and for a moment, I saw myself 17 again, small, erased. Then I saw the woman I'd become, focused, steady, unafraid. And I whispered to the empty air, "Let them take the credit. I'll take the legacy." Have you ever watched someone try to steal what they never helped build? Tell me in the comments. Because real power isn't loud. It's the silence that follows after you've already won. I never thought I'd hear the words come out of my mother's mouth, but there they were, soft, desperate, laced with the same quiet panic she wore the night she showed up at my door. "Layla, we need you to speak for the family. It was an event, a charity gala. The same one Baba used to attend every year. The same one where our family's name was once printed on banners and brochures like it meant something permanent. This time, they'd asked for someone from Al Hashimi Group to give a short speech on resilience in the business world. They assumed it would be Zaid, but after the press caught wind of his mismanagement, they politely redirected the invitation to me. I should have said no, not because I was afraid, but because I knew what they really wanted. It wasn't just about the speech. It was about the symbol. Me standing there in a sleek dress, microphone in hand, acting like the fractures in our family name had healed themselves. Like I hadn't spent 3 years being treated like a stain they'd scrubbed out of the photo album. They didn't want me to tell the truth. They wanted me to look pretty and speak softly. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost agreed. Until I remembered, I didn't climb out of silence just to become a prop in their apology tour. So I said yes, but on my terms. The night of the gala, I wore navy. Not red, not black, nothing loud, just strength, wrapped in elegance. The ballroom was packed. Chandeliers, press cameras, people who once acted like I didn't exist now suddenly waving as I passed their tables. Zaid wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He didn't do well in rooms where people weren't applauding him. My mother sat at a round table near the front, her hands folded, eyes fixed on her lap. I stepped onto the stage without notes, and I told the story they didn't expect to hear. My father built a business from the ground up with his hands, his sweat, and his prayers. But legacy isn't built on inheritance. It's built on integrity. 3 years ago, I was cut out of the picture, not by enemies, by people I loved. And instead of fighting for a seat at their table, I built my own. There was silence, uncomfortable, then electric, the kind that hangs in the air right before people decide whether to be inspired or offended. I looked directly at the audience and finished with this. Family doesn't mean covering up wrongs. It means choosing accountability over image. And if we're going to survive in this world as businesses, as communities, as human beings, we have to stop pretending perfection is a legacy worth protecting. I walked off stage. No applause. Not at first. Then one clap. Then another. And then the room stood. Not for the speech, for the truth. Later that night, as I collected my things, my mother approached me. She looked tired, but different. There was no mask on her face, no forced smile. Just a mother looking at her daughter like she'd finally seen her clearly. You didn't have to say those things, she whispered. I know, I said, but you needed to hear them. She nodded, then reached into her bag and handed me a small box. Wooden, familiar. It was Baba's prayer beads. He wanted Zaid to have everything, she said. But this, he kept in his drawer until the day he died. He never gave it away. Maybe because deep down, he knew who it really belonged to. I didn't cry. I just took them gently in my hand, felt the worn wood between my fingers, and whispered a single dua under my breath. Ya Rabbi, grant me the strength to carry what others wasted. That night, I didn't go home right away. I walked through the city streets, heels in hand, silence in my ears. Not sadness, not triumph, just clarity. I had spoken the truth, not for revenge, not for applause, but for myself. And in that moment, I realized the family name didn't need saving. I did. And now, I no longer needed it to define me. Have you ever been asked to represent something that once rejected you? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that was once told to stay silent. He didn't call. He didn't text. He came in person. Zaid, the same brother who once said, "You'll be back when life hits you." The same man who stood silently as I was erased from our father's will, then stood loudly in the spotlight built on my labor. And now, he was standing at the threshold of my office, not in a suit, not with arrogance, but in a worn hoodie, eyes dull, hands empty. I didn't invite him in, but he stepped inside anyway, like he still thought the world owed him room. He sat across from me without a word, just breathed slowly, like even silence cost too much now. Finally, I asked, "What do you want, Zaid?" He looked up, and for the first time in years, I didn't see confidence or even anger. I saw fear, real, heavy, swallowing fear. "I need your help," he said. "I lost the house." I stared at him, not in shock, but in expectation, because of course he had. "I tried everything," he said. "I sold the cars. I restructured what I could, but they're taking it next week." I waited. He kept talking. I have nowhere to go. Not even mom's. She's staying with my aunt now. Everyone's turned their back. No one wants to be associated with me. Not even my wife. I blinked. Wife? He looked away. She filed last month. I didn't tell anyone. I leaned back in my chair. So this was it. The collapse. Not the business. Not the bank accounts. Him. The version of Zaid that was built on applause and entitlement was finally gone. Now only a man remained, cracked, humbled, confused by his own humanity. I didn't come for money, he added quickly. I know I don't deserve it. He trailed off. I finished the sentence for him. You want shelter. He nodded. I said nothing, because I didn't know what to say. Not out of cruelty, out of disbelief. Because the brother who once watched me leave home with 80 lira and a suitcase was now asking for my roof. Why me? I asked finally. He hesitated, then said the only honest thing I've heard from him in years. Because you're the only one who ever learned how to survive. It wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just told him to come back the next day. Alone. No bags. No assumptions. Just truth. And when he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding, not with anger, but something heavier, grief. Because watching someone who hurt you finally understand what they've done isn't satisfying. It's sad. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced, prayed, sat with the beads my mother gave me, Baba's beads, and asked Allah for clarity. Because I knew what I wanted, but I didn't know what was right. Not for him, for me. In the morning, I left the apartment early. I went to the building across town I'd been quietly renovating. A 4-unit complex I bought with the earnings from Layla Strategies. It wasn't ready yet, but one of the units had been cleaned and furnished. I stood in the center of it and felt the weight of every step I'd taken to get there. Every bakery shift, every night tutoring, every insult swallowed, every deal signed. And then I called Zaid. You'll find a key under the 3rd step. Unit 2. It's yours for 3 months. After that, you'll need to find your own way. He was quiet, then said, Why are you doing this? I paused, then answered, because I promised myself I'd never become you. Helping someone isn't weakness, but forgetting who they were when they had power, that is. And I wasn't about to forget. Later that week, I walked past his door. I didn't knock. I didn't ask if he was okay. Because this wasn't about comfort. It was about consequence. I left a small note on the table inside. Survival is earned, not inherited. Have you ever helped someone who would have never helped you back? Tell me in the comments. Because the greatest power isn't revenge, it's knowing you can choose mercy without forgetting the wound. The first time Zaid ever said I'm sorry, I almost didn't hear it. Not because he didn't say it loud enough, but because my heart had stopped listening a long time ago. It was early morning. I had gone to check on the renovation crew at one of the new office spaces I was funding, a quiet place tucked into a narrow street where young women could start small businesses without someone breathing down their necks. A dream that came from years of knowing what it felt like to be ignored, erased. As I walked back toward the building's parking lot, I saw him, sitting on the low concrete wall near the curb, his shoulders slouched, face pale, hands clasped like he was praying, or maybe just holding on. He didn't look up when I approached. I stopped a few feet away and waited. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't answer. He sighed, stood up slowly, and met my eyes. Layla, I'm sorry. No embellishments, no excuses. Just those 3 words floating in the space between us like dust particles in sunlight. I wanted to feel something, but I didn't. Not joy, not anger, not relief, just quiet. The kind of quiet you carry after years of loud betrayal. He must have taken my silence as permission, because he kept going. I was jealous. That's the truth. I saw how Baba looked at you when you fixed things, how he trusted you with stuff I couldn't even understand. And when he made the will, I didn't ask why your name wasn't there. I just accepted it. I told myself you'd be fine. Strong girls always land on their feet, right? He let out a humorless laugh. You built everything I tried to pretend I could inherit. I crossed my arms. Still nothing in me wanted to embrace him. Not yet, but I listened. Because sometimes silence is not permission, it's power. When you paid my rent, he said, voice trembling, I hated myself. Not because I didn't have a place to go, but because you had every right to let me fall. And you didn't. I've said a lot of stupid things in my life, Layla, but the dumbest one was that day in the lawyer's office. When I smiled, that made me flinch. Because I remembered it. perfectly. I remembered the taste of metal in my mouth when I realized everything Baba left behind was gone and how Zaid sat there, tapping his pen like the ink in it belonged to him by birthright. He stepped closer, only slightly. I've said a lot of stupid things in my life, Layla, but the dumbest one was that day in the lawyer's office. When I smiled, that made me flinch, because I remembered it perfectly. I remembered the taste of metal in my mouth when I realized everything Baba left behind was gone and how Zaid sat there, tapping his pen like the ink in it belonged to him by birthright. He stepped closer, only slightly. I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I needed you to hear me say it. For real, without the ego, without the mask. I looked at him, long and hard. His eyes weren't the same. The fire was gone. What was left wasn't pathetic, it was raw. For once, he wasn't performing. He was just human. And yet, the wound inside me wasn't closed by this apology. Because forgiveness isn't a door someone else opens. It's a room you walk into when you're ready. And I wasn't there yet. So I said, I hear you. Nothing more. Not it's okay. Not I forgive you. Just that. Because I couldn't lie. And he needed to sit in the weight of what he'd done, not be rescued from it again. He nodded like he understood. Then asked, will we ever be close again? I exhaled. A slow, long breath. No, but we can be decent. That was the most mercy I could give him. And to his credit, he didn't argue. He just nodded again and left, quietly, with no promises, no grand finale, just truth late, but real. Later that night, I told Huda, the bookstore owner who had once taken me in, about it. We were drinking tea in her kitchen. She listened, then said something I'll never forget. Forgiveness isn't letting someone walk back into your heart. It's letting them walk away without dragging you behind them. I smiled. For the first time that day. I still haven't forgiven Zaid. Not fully. Not yet. But I did something else. Something harder. I let go of the version of him I kept trying to fix. Because that girl, the one who always believed in people who didn't protect her, deserved peace more than she deserved justice. And that peace was something I could finally start giving to her. Has anyone ever apologized to you after the damage was already done? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes I'm sorry doesn't fix the past, but it frees you to stop carrying it. I never wanted to carry the name again. Not after what happened with the will. Not after being erased from the documents that defined my family's legacy. Al-Hashimi, a name that once felt like honor and heritage, but slowly decayed into something bitter. Something hollow. Something that echoed in the halls of betrayal more than belonging. I had rebuilt everything without it. My business didn't carry it. My new property deeds didn't include it. Even on legal paperwork, I sometimes wrote just Layla. But there's something strange about healing. It doesn't always push you away from the pain. Sometimes when the wound closes, it brings you right back to where it all started, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. It happened unexpectedly. An invitation this time, not from a desperate relative or a falling business, but from the city itself. There was a community development project launching focused on education and entrepreneurship for underprivileged girls. The city council wanted local figures to sponsor it, not celebrities, not politicians, builders, the kind of people who had turned silence into structure. I was honored. Then I read the next line. We would also like to name the main hall after your father, Yunus al-Hashimi. I froze. I read it again, and again, as if the words would soften with repetition. But they didn't. They didn't know the story. Not really. Not the betrayal. Not the signature that went missing. Not the conversations behind doors that were never mine. To them, Baba was still the man who built homes for the working class. The man who never missed a Juma prayer. The man who sponsored 6 orphan scholarships. And part of me still loved that version of him. Still remembered the warmth in his voice when I recited Quran in perfect Tajudi. Still remembered how he used to carry me on his shoulders and say, my Layla sees higher than I ever will. So what do you do when the same man who loved you also erased you? I went to visit his grave that night. First time in years. The soil had settled. The gravestone was modest. Just his name, a short dua, and a date carved cleanly beneath. There were no flowers, just silence. I sat beside it and spoke aloud. Not because I thought he could hear me, but because I needed to hear myself. I don't know why you did what you did, I said. Maybe you thought you were protecting me. Maybe someone else convinced you I didn't need protecting. Maybe you really believed Zaid would do what was right. He didn't. But I did. My voice cracked. But I didn't stop. I kept your name clean. I kept your business alive. I kept your memory more honorable than the legacy you wrote. And now, they want to name a hall after you. I paused. Let the wind say what I couldn't. Then added, if I say yes, it won't be for you. It will be for every girl who walks through that door and thinks she doesn't belong just because her name isn't printed on someone else's plans. I said yes, but with one condition. Under his name, in bold letters, sponsored by Layla Daughter, builder, survivor. The council agreed without hesitation. But Zaid, he didn't take it well. He called me the morning the press release went live. So you're rewriting history now? I didn't flinch. No, I'm finishing what you couldn't start. You think putting your name next to his makes you his equal? No, I replied. It makes me his redemption. He hung up. Of course he did. Because for men like him, silence is the last weapon when power slips from their hands. But I didn't need his approval. Not anymore. Not ever again. The day of the ceremony, I wore a dark green dress the color of growth, of earth, of things that heal in time. The plaque was unveiled at noon. Dozens of young girls in hijabs filled the room, some clutching notebooks, others shyly waving at the photographers. I stood behind the podium and looked out at them. Then I looked at the name behind me, Jake, and just below it, Layla, finally, side by side. Not because he gave it to me, because I took it back, with grace, with effort, with every scar turned into a stepping stone. My father's name built homes, I said, but I built safe ones. Places where no one gets left out of the plans. Where daughters are not second in line, they are the architects of the future. A standing ovation followed. But I wasn't looking at the crowd. I was looking at the empty chair in the front row, the one I left untouched. Baba's. Not to honor him, not to spite him, but to remind myself, I don't need the seat I was once denied. I built my own stage, and I placed his name next to mine, because I chose to, not because I had to. Have you ever reclaimed something that was stolen, not to punish, but to rebuild? Tell me in the comments. Because the strongest revenge isn't destruction, it's restoration on your own terms. I never had a mentor. No one ever pulled me aside and said, I see something in you. No one gave me a shortcut. No one passed down a secret. I learned everything by walking into locked rooms, memorizing where the hinges creaked, and building keys from broken parts. So when the community center director emailed me asking if I'd consider mentoring 5 teenage girls in their entrepreneurship program, I didn't say yes right away. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew the weight of what they were really asking. They weren't asking for a consultant. They were asking for a mirror. A woman who had lived the failure, carried the betrayal, swallowed the silence, and kept building. Someone who had been through it and made it out. Their names were Amira, Salma, Lean, Yasmin, and Hannah, aged between 14 and 17, each with their own story. Each with that same flicker in their eyes I used to carry, the spark of maybe I can, constantly fighting against the shadow of but what if I can't. We met every Wednesday afternoon in the back room of the center, just a round table, 5 chairs, and a whiteboard covered in words like purpose, revenue, and ownership. But we never started with strategy. We always started with silence, because I remembered what it felt like to enter a room and wonder if your voice would matter. So I let them take the lead. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Both were fine, because I wasn't there to impress them. I was there to hold space. Salma wanted to start a hijab line. Amira loved video editing. Lean didn't know what she wanted, just that she liked helping people organize things. Yasmin was already baking and selling cookies from home. And Hannah? She didn't speak much. She just listened, eyes sharp, pen always moving. She reminded me of myself more than I cared to admit. One day, I brought in some of my old journals, not the polished ones I show in interviews, the messy ones, torn pages, scribbles, ink stains, the ones filled with doubt, bitterness, prayer. I laid them on the table and said, this is what building looks like. They stared at the pages like they were sacred, not because they were brilliant, but because they were real. And real is rare when the world is constantly trying to sell you perfection. Weeks passed. They started opening up more, asking questions. Did you ever want to quit? Did your family believe in you? What did you do when no one showed up? I answered honestly, yes. I wanted to quit every other week. No, my family believed in tradition, not me. I kept showing up anyway. That's how you make space for the people who will eventually come, and slowly, their projects grew. Lean started a planner business online. Amira launched a short documentary on young Muslim creatives. Hannah still hadn't spoken much, but one day, she handed me a letter. I read it that night. By the end, my hands were shaking. She wrote, "Miss Layla, I've never had a woman look at me and not expect me to be smaller. You never asked me to talk more. But every time you let me be quiet, I got louder inside. I want to be like you, not because you're successful, because you survived and still smile." I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "Alhamdulillah, because nothing I ever built, no property, no deal, no article compared to this, to being the woman I once searched for and couldn't find." The last day of the program, the girls surprised me. They made a presentation. Each shared one thing they'd learned. Salma said, "I learned that my idea matters, even if no one in my family understands it." Lean said, "I learned that being unsure isn't weakness. It's how you build honestly." Amira said, "I learned that failure doesn't disqualify you. It teaches you where the cracks are." Yasmin said, "I learned that I don't need to wait for permission." And Hannah? She stood up, eyes full of light, and said, "But because for the first time, I saw the full circle. I hadn't just healed, I had become healing for someone else." That night, I opened my old journal, the one I'd written in the day I left home. I flipped to the last page and wrote, "Legacy isn't what they leave behind. It's what you pass forward when no one gave it to you first." And then I slept, peacefully, because I knew, somewhere in that city, 5 girls were writing themselves into stories that didn't exist before they dared to speak. Have you ever become the person you once needed? Tell me in the comments. Because revenge doesn't always look like payback, sometimes it looks like protection. For the next you. I was pouring tea when the message came. Simple, plain, no emojis, no dramatic punctuation. "Can you come home this weekend?" I stared at the screen. The word home didn't mean what it used to. Not to me. Home was supposed to be warm, safe, familiar. But the house I grew up in had become a museum of disappointments, a place where my name was erased in silence, then whispered again only when they needed me. So when I saw that message, I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt caution, because I knew better now. When people who pushed you away suddenly want you close, it's rarely about you. It's about what you represent. And in my family's case, I had become something they never expected: stability, respect, a name people now listen to. I didn't reply, not right away. I let the message sit. I spent the next day reviewing contracts, meeting with new clients, walking through the girls' mentorship center. And every time I touched something I had built with my own hands, I remembered what it felt like to be 17 and walk out of my family home with nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. So if they wanted me back now, they weren't calling their daughter. They were summoning the woman they had no part in shaping. 2 days later, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "You got my message," she said, as if we were just picking up from yesterday's conversation, not years of silence, apologies, and uncomfortable truths. "I did," I replied. She didn't explain why. She didn't say please. She just said, "It would mean a lot if you came. Everyone will be there. It's for Baba." I froze. "What about him?" She sighed. "It's been 5 years this week. We're holding a small remembrance. Zaid will speak. They want you there too. They said it would be good to show unity." Unity. The word hit like a stone. Not love, not family. Unity, like we were a brand, a campaign, a headline. I almost declined. Almost. But something in me, a flicker of unfinished business, or maybe just the child who never got to say goodbye properly, said, "I'll come." The drive was long and silent. I didn't play music. I didn't take calls. I just watched the highway stretch ahead of me like a story I was finally ready to finish. As I turned onto the old road that led to our neighborhood, memories came like wind. My father's voice calling for Fajr. Zaid and I racing down the stairs for sewer. My mother brushing my hair before school and telling me to be small, so they won't step on you. That one stuck the longest, because I had spent years doing the opposite. Not to prove her wrong, but to prove I was allowed to exist without apology. Replaced, I noticed, by a landscape painting, neutral, silent, forgettable, just like they wanted me to be. The garden was quiet, people murmuring softly, black clothing, bowls of dates, sweets untouched. Zaid was speaking already, a short, rehearsed speech about Baba's dedication, his vision, his dreams. He didn't mention the will. He didn't mention the erasure. Just the clean parts of the past, the ones that still fit into public sympathy. When he finished, People clapped lightly, respectfully. Then someone said, "Will Layla say a few words?" The entire garden turned, dozens of eyes, some warm, some waiting to judge. I stood, not because I was ready, but because I'd spent too many years sitting in silence. I took a breath, then began. When my father died, a lawyer read a list of what he left behind. My name wasn't on it. People shifted. I didn't stop. But what I inherited was something none of you saw. Silence, doubt, a lesson in what it means to survive with nothing but faith and fury. I loved my father deeply, but love is not the same as legacy. And if I've honored him in any way, it's by turning my absence into abundance. Not through revenge but through rebuilding. I paused, then added, he didn't leave me anything, but he gave me something anyway, a reason, and sometimes that's more powerful than a bank account. The garden was dead silent, not because they disapproved, but because they didn't expect the truth to wear a dress and speak with peace. Afterward, people approached me, some with soft smiles, others with guilt in their eyes they couldn't name. My aunt hugged me and whispered, "You sound just like him." I smiled. "No," I said, "I sound like me." Zaid didn't say a word. He stood across the garden, watching, then turned and walked inside. I didn't follow, because the girl who used to chase his approval was gone. The woman who took her own name back didn't need his validation. Later, as the guests left, I wandered back into the house, into Baba's old study. It was locked, always had been, but now, the key was in the door. I turned it. Inside, dust floated like ghosts. The desk still had his Quran, a notebook, some old receipts, and a drawer slightly open. Inside it, a letter, my name on the front, handwritten, shaky, Layla. Just that. I sat down and opened it. The handwriting was familiar, uneven, a mix of regret and love stitched in crooked lines. If you're reading this, I've probably already gone, and I know what's been done. I let people convince me you'd be fine, stronger than most. I thought I was protecting Zaid from drowning, but in doing so, I nearly left you to burn. You have something none of us do, clarity. Even in silence, even in pain, and if this world is just, you'll turn all of it into something better than I ever could. I didn't write you into the will, but I wrote you into every prayer. I hope, one day, that's enough. I sat in that chair for a long time, not crying, not angry, just still. And when I stood, I left the letter where I found it, because I didn't need to take it with me. I had already carried those words in my soul for years. Now, they could rest. Has someone ever called you back only after you prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes come home means nothing when you've already built your own. They invited me to speak at a leadership conference, a panel they said, Women in Power. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if they knew the cost of that power, they might not have been so eager to hand me a microphone. But I accepted, because I was done hiding. And because sometimes, when you survive the kind of silence they tried to bury you in, you don't just speak, you echo. The conference was held in one of those glass-walled hotels where everything looks expensive but feels empty. I arrived early, not out of anxiety, out of habit. I always like to feel the room before the room feels me. The stage was set, 5 chairs, a long table, nameplates. I found mine. It didn't say Layla, it said, Layla Strategies founder and CEO. They had erased the family name, probably to look more modern, more neutral, more empowered. But they didn't understand. I wasn't here to play nice. I was here to make sure no girl in that audience would ever feel what I felt at 17, powerless in a room that pretended to welcome her. The panel began. They asked the usual questions. What inspired you? What challenges did you face? How do you balance leadership and life? The other women gave polished answers, smiles, laughter, catchphrases. I stayed quiet until the moderator looked at me and said, Layla, you've built a powerful presence in the business world. But tell us, what's been your biggest win? I didn't even blink, choosing not to stay quiet. Silence, not awkward, electric, the kind that tells you you've just hit a nerve. I continued. My biggest win wasn't a contract. It wasn't a building. It wasn't even this title you placed in front of my name. It was the moment I realized that every time I let someone else narrate my story, they wrote me out of it. I looked directly at the crowd, not the cameras, not the panelists, the young women in the middle rows, the back corners, the ones gripping notebooks with Hope and fear and ambition twisted into their knuckles. I was cut out of a will. I was told to trust the people who erased me. I was expected to come back quietly as a daughter, a sister, a fixer. But I returned as an architect, and I'm telling you now, you don't need their permission to rebuild. Applause didn't come immediately. It came slowly, then fiercely, then all at once. The kind of applause that doesn't celebrate performance but truth. Afterward, I walked off stage to a line of people waiting to speak with me. Some were women in suits, some were students, but one girl no older than 17 looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I almost didn't come today. I thought this world wasn't built for girls like me, but you made me feel like maybe it is." I reached out and held her hand and said, "Then build it. Build it loud. Build it where they can't ignore you." Later that evening, the event organizers sent me a message. They wanted to turn my words into a quote for next year's brochure. I agreed with one change. They wanted to use, choosing not to stay quiet, but I asked them to use this instead. I didn't just survive. I rewrote the story. They said yes. Of course they did, because the truth has a way of forcing its way to the front even when people try to package it into something safer. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. No makeup, no mic, just me, the girl they tried to silence, now fully visible. I whispered something I hadn't said in years. "Baba, I'm not your legacy. I'm my own." And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was betraying him. I felt like I was honoring the version of me that even he never got to know. Have you ever refused to be quiet even when they expected you to shrink? Tell me in the comments. Because silence might be comfortable for others, but truth will always make the loudest sound in the room. Doors don't always slam. Sometimes they close gently, quietly, without drama or sound. But that doesn't make the moment any less final. And when I closed the door on my past, on the people who only remembered me when I became useful, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't look back. I just turned the lock and walked away. It started with a wedding. My cousin's. The same cousin who used to call me Zaid's shadow. The one who told people I was too ambitious, too proud, too difficult to marry. But now she wanted me at the front row of her big day. Because I was an inspiration. Because I had become such a symbol of success for the family. They sent a gold-trimmed invitation with my full name on it, Layla Al-Hashimi, guest of honor. I stared at the card for a long time. It looked beautiful, but all I could think about was how many times I had been invisible in this family, how many celebrations I had been left out of, how many milestones they never thought I'd reach until I reached them without them. And now they wanted me seated at their table, polished, presentable, proof that they were never really the villains they used to be. I almost said yes, out of politeness, out of that old wound called maybe they've changed. But then I remembered something my mentor once told me. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to what broke you. It means walking past it without bleeding. So I didn't RSVP. I didn't send regrets. I just didn't go. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. 3 days later, my mother called. No greeting, just a sharp breath and, "You embarrassed the family." I didn't respond. She continued. "People were asking where you were. We told them you were busy, but it didn't look good, Layla. You know how it is, image matters." I closed my eyes tight, then said, slowly, "You were worried about how it looked. Maybe you should have worried about how it felt when I was erased from your dinners, your gatherings, your conversations." She went quiet. I added, "Tell them whatever you want. I'm not coming back, not as a showpiece, not as a symbol of your recovery. I am not your redemption story." And then I hung up. That night, I did something I hadn't done since I left home at 17. I wrote down everything I still carried, every name that never defended me, every favor I gave that was never returned, every version of myself I killed just to make others comfortable. And then I burned the page, watched it turn to ash in a ceramic bowl on my balcony. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood there, watching the smoke disappear into the sky, letting go, for real. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I had been helping manage a few family properties out of duty old apartments that still held my father's name. I told her I wanted to transfer management to someone else. Step out, fully? She asked if I was sure. I said, "I'm not stepping down. I'm stepping away. Because leadership isn't holding on when something poisons you. It's knowing when to release it before it drowns you quietly." A week later, I packed a single bag and drove out of the city. No plan, no map, just air. space, freedom that didn't need permission. I stayed in a guest house by the coast, spent the mornings praying by the sea, spent the afternoons walking. No emails, no meetings, no family, just me. I started writing again, not business plans, stories about girls who weren't chosen, but chose themselves, about women who healed without applause, about forgiveness that didn't end with reconciliation but with peace. On the final day, I received a message from Hannah, one of the girls I mentored. Miss Layla, you probably hear this a lot, but you made me feel like I didn't have to shrink to survive. You made me feel big, without being loud. Thank you. I smiled, because there it was, the only legacy I needed. Not the family name, not the applause, just one girl who wouldn't have to learn the hard way like I did. I returned to the city not as someone who had escaped, but as someone who had closed the door. For good, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. Because healing isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's lonely, but it always ends with a locked door and a woman walking away on her own terms. Have you ever walked away not out of anger, but out of peace? Tell me in the comments. Because the real revenge isn't leaving the door open for them to return. It's closing it without needing them to knock again. There was no applause, no final scene, no dramatic confrontation where they finally said, "We were wrong about you." Just silence. A soft, slow, undeniable silence that came after years of noise, betrayal, and reaching for hands that were never meant to hold me. And in that silence, I built everything. They say revenge is best served cold, but I never wanted revenge. I wanted freedom. And freedom doesn't roar. It doesn't explode. It breathes. It grows in the quiet rooms no one sees, where you plant roots in the soil they swore you'd never touch. That's what I did. While they were too busy watching each other, I planted something deeper than legacy. I planted myself. The sender I dreamed of, it's real now. We opened 2 new branches this year. One in a rural village where young girls walk miles just to find a book. The other in a city where fathers bring their daughters and say, "I want her to have what my sister didn't." We don't sell success. We teach voice. We teach space. We teach girls how to sit at tables no one invited them to and build better ones if they're denied. And every brick in those buildings, paid for by the girl they erased at 17. The girl they told, "You'll be back when life hits you." Well, life did hit me. And I hit back, not with fists, with foundation. I don't talk to Zaid. We haven't spoken in a year, not because I hate him, but because there's nothing left to say. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's distance. And distance, for me, is peace. My mother sends messages occasionally, birthdays, holidays. She signs them with love. I don't know if she means it now or if she regrets the years she withheld it, but I don't reply out of bitterness. I reply when I can, because I no longer let their absence define my presence. I bought a home by the sea, not a mansion, not a trophy, just a quiet place with windows that let the sun in, and a porch where I drink tea after Fajr. There's a bookshelf that holds every journal I ever wrote, from the first night I slept in that bakery storeroom to the day I signed my company's millionth contract. They remind me of the version of me that never stopped walking, even when she couldn't see the road. And when girls visit me, mentees, new hires, strangers who read my articles, I hand them those journals and say, "You don't need to win. You just need to start." Sometimes people still ask, "What would you say to your family now?" I tell them the truth. Nothing. Because there's nothing left to prove, nothing to reclaim. I didn't just build a life without them. I built a life they couldn't control. A life where I didn't need forgiveness to feel whole. Where my worth wasn't decided by a surname or an inheritance. Where I didn't need to be written into their plans, because I wrote my own. Last week, a woman came up to me after a seminar, hijab perfectly wrapped, tears in her eyes. She whispered, "You gave me permission to not shrink." I held her hand, looked her in the eyes, and said, "You were never meant to." That's the life I built. Not flashy, not loud, but real, rooted, whole. I wake up every morning now not wondering who I'll have to prove myself to. I wake up wondering which girl I'll help prove something to herself. And that's more powerful than any revenge. Because revenge fades, but impact, it ripples, it echoes. And sometimes the girl they erased becomes the woman who makes sure no one else disappears. Have you ever built something after they swore you never could? Tell me in the comments. Because the best revenge isn't being seen by the people who doubted you, it's becoming visible to those who never had a chance.